Expanding the tax-based system in most countries in the African continent is probably a necessity at this point in the economic times that we exist in. And carbon tax is probably one of the ways we will discuss when it comes to matters expanding the tax base. At the heart of this motion today is a conversation around carbon tax. And the motion reads, the Kenyan government should introduce carbon tax to encourage environmentally sustainable practices. I read the motion again. The Kenyan government should introduce carbon tax to encourage environmentally sustainable practices. Opposing and proposing this motion is Matungulu girls versus Machakos boys. Here for the Lower Eastern Region debates, I have been your host, Jana Cheng. All the best to both teams. Team proposition, first speaker, you have 3 minutes.
Carbon tax has been a hot topic as the world deals with severe climatic changes. No wonder our motion today. The Kenyan government should introduce carbon tax to encourage environmentally sustainable practices. I, Winifred Mumo, from Matungulu Girls High School, strongly propose the motion as stated earlier. The Kenyan government should introduce carbon tax to encourage environmentally sustainable practices. So, what is government? According to the Oxford 10th edition dictionary, a government is a group of people who are responsible for controlling a country or a state. To introduce is to bring in carbon tax. Not many have heard of carbon tax, but carbon tax is the tax levied on emissions required to produce goods and services, as proposed by David Wilson in the year 1973. To encourage is to persuade somebody to do something by making it easier for them and making them believe it is a good thing to do. Environmentally sustainable practices involving the use of natural resources and energy that do not cause harm to the environment. Now, on to my first point. According to Economics Help, 1st December 2020, climate change has been the most pressing challenge in facing the world today. Introducing carbon taxes will discourage companies from emitting greenhouse gas emissions that will cause our environment harm. This will enable them to go for other alternatives, thus leading to reduction of greenhouse gases emitted to the atmosphere. I have a question. Which industry does not use fuel and produce carbon? An answer? No. Every industry that uses fuel emits carbon. So when we have carbon tax, it will be easy for our meteorologists to know the weather patterns easily. We will be able to know. They will be able to tell us effectively, predict the weather patterns. We will be able to know the seasons on when to plant. Agriculture is the backbone of our country. And having these statistics in our fingertips will enable us to know when to plant, when not to plant. And to my second point, encourages alternatives. This will push companies to look for other methods that to produce their products. These methods, they're such as solar power, hydrogen engines. This will encourage investments into renewable sources of energy. So, making solar power more competitive than fossil fuels. I still propose the motion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Team Opposition. First speaker, you have 3 minutes.
Ladies and gentlemen, the greatest lie ever told is the lie to oneself. And I, Pharrell Roy, from the great Machakos school, firmly oppose the motion which says that the Kenyan government should introduce carbon tax as a way to encourage environmentally sustainable practices. First of all, let me disagree with the definition of my worthy opponents. I am sure that even the audience didn't get clearly what you are meaning. According to the UN, the carbon tax is the amount of tax levied on carbon emissions by companies. These companies which produce goods and services. And whereas environmentally sustainable practices, these are practices which encourage our environment to be conserved, not compromising of our future generation of meeting their needs of the environment. Ladies and gentlemen, which are these environmentally sustainable practices? Yes, they are there. For example, there is sustainable waste management practices, whereby we have recycling of items. Ladies and gentlemen, we have sustainable water and sanitary factors. Ladies and gentlemen, that is a way of encouraging environmentally sustainable practices. How can I define a present without a past? In the year 1979, economist Milton Friedman said that the best way, and I repeat, the best way to cope with carbon emission is to introduce carbon tax. But was that true? Okay, that sounded as a good idea at first, but whereby we find that in the year 1990, a country like Finland introduced carbon tax. And many countries have followed suit and introduced carbon tax. But carbon tax are generally a work in progress. But what for our country, Kenya? In our country, we have various environmental problems. And according to Springer.com, carbon taxes may encourage as much as carbon taxes may not limit the emission of carbon into our environment as much as other practices. Let's take a case study, Australia. Australia is the world's leading producer of carbon. Yet, Australia, in the year 2012, Australia introduced carbon tax as a way of coping with this problem they faced. But let us look at the results. This carbon tax only promoted 19%, and I repeat, 19% of carbon emissions, yet we have other factors like 30% of our forest cover will enable us to limit 50% of carbon emissions. And I rest my case by saying that the nature of our future is dictated by the future of our nature. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Team Proposition, second speaker, you have 3 minutes.
Lack of knowledge is actually a recipe for disaster. Pacifica joining Matungulu girls, strongly proposing the motion that Kenyan government should actually introduce carbon tax to encourage environmentally sustainable practices. You gave us an example of Australia. According to World Bank report IDS 2013, it reveals that in other countries such as Brasilia, Colombia, Indonesia have been successful in the implementation of this carbon tax. And you only gave us Australia? I gave you 3. We all want good health. According to imf.org, with the introduction of carbon tax, we'll be able to have health benefits and also environmental benefits. With the introduction of carbon tax, we're going to reduce these GHG emissions. Actually, from your chemistry lesson, you learned that GHG emissions destroy ozone layer. With the destruction of ozone layer, ultraviolet rays are able to penetrate through. Humans plus ultraviolet rays, skin cancer. You really don't want that. According to Business Daily Africa, with the introduction of carbon tax, we'll be able to encourage environmental responsibility. Why? These businesses are going to be provided with financial incentives, and so they're going to reduce their carbon emissions. And so when the government lays a price on this carbon tax, on these businesses actually, they're going to put a pressure to them, and they won't have any other choice but to move to clean energy, clean technology. A country such as UK actually implemented carbon tax in 2013, and coal use fuel reduced, and greenhouse gas emissions actually reduced, and it's a country that we would want to be like. Revenue for environmental initiatives. With the introduction of carbon tax, we'll be able to use the revenue that we get there to fund environmental initiatives such as renewable energy projects, sustainable infrastructure, and also development, hence allowing the government to also invest in green technologies, and this will result to increase in job employment. So, audience, Kenyans, let us not be ostriches and bury our heads down and not see the advantage that carbon tax will have to us as Kenyans. And so in all this, please, Let us take the initiative and support that carbon tax will actually provide good environmental practices. So, what's more to say? I have actually convinced you. Take the facts. Pacifica journey. I actually still propose the motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Second speaker, Team Opposition, you have 3 minutes.
On this stage is Ephraim Kiari from the Machakos School, standing firm to oppose the motion that states the Kenyan government should introduce carbon tax to encourage environmentally sustainable practices. I would like to oppose what my worthy opponent has just mentioned, saying that industries emit carbon. Yes, it is true. Bringing this carbon tax will reduce. That is what you've said. But implying this carbon tax will decrease employment just as it did during the COVID-19 era crisis. Again, my other opponent mentioned that bringing the carbon tax forces productions in factories to go for cleaner options, clean energy and technology. Please allow me to enlighten your vocabulary. This will lead to industrial leakage. This leads me to my first point: shifting of manufacturing productions to non-taxing nations. It is common sense. When a country decides to implement a tax, a company looks for better ways to cope with it. And the better alternative is looking for a new location, going to a country that does not tax it. We are chasing away resources, investors, employment, yet here we claim there is lack of employment in this country. We can't enjoy a good dinner in the supper, yet we are the cause of our own issues. Second, there is no guarantee, I repeat, no guarantee that this carbon tax will be useful. According to the EACC, Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, Kenya is losing an estimated 608 billion, 7.8% of our own GDP annually. According to ranking by Transparency International, Kenya is ranked 123 out of 180, with a scale of 32 over 100. In my school's grading system, this is a very strong E. How am I, as a Kenyan, going to believe that with this current government, the innocent, duly paid carbon tax will be used to encourage these environmentally sustainable practices? According to an article by Julius Otieno for the Star newspaper, on February 2019, Lands Cabinet Secretary, former, Farida Karonei, could not sit down and account for 20 billion worth of taxpayers' money between 2017 and 18. Yet you're here to introduce another tax that you say will encourage environmentally sustainable practices and will not even be implemented. How? How? It is with this short explanation that I urge you to join my side, oppose these carbon taxes, embrace other sustainable practices. And with this, I rest my case.
Thank you very much. Third speaker, Team Proposition, you have 3 minutes.
The Kenyan government should introduce carbon tax to encourage environmentally sustainable practices. I, Lizzie Mwethia, stand before you to strongly propose this motion. They said introducing carbon tax enables people to lose jobs, right? Then how sure are we that when these people are laid off, they will not be creative and think of other alternatives of employing themselves? Kenyans are creative and they work on creativity. They will be able to look for other job alternatives. Secondly, they said it will not be effective. Remember, Rome was not built in a day, but in the end, it was fully constructed. So if we introduce carbon tax, we do not mean that it's going to rise. It will fluctuate easily. It will have to take steps. And the government has already introduced these ideas. It only needs you to put a stamp and tell them that they're supposed to have it right now. And if they start, Rome was not built in a day. They will have to take steps. And this shows that they are sure that this is going to lead our nation far. On to my first point, evidence of success. Everybody here wants to be associated with success. Many countries are already implementing this carbon tax, and we have seen to it that this carbon tax is helping them. How is it helping them? First, the emission of carbon has reduced by a very high rate, and even the emission of carbon dioxide. Let me give you an example. According to Economic Helps, Sweden introduced carbon tax in the year 1991. And they were taxing each ton for 33 pounds. Later on, they saw that it was effective, and they changed from 33 pounds to 120 pounds per ton. And later in the mid-1990s, they saw that the emission of carbon reduced from 100% to 80%. Now do that math. How did it reduce? By 20%. Kenyans, the government is able to introduce this carbon tax, and it is able to curb this emission of carbon taxes which are brought about by the companies which emit carbon. Secondly, equal distribution of taxes. While the opponents argue that bringing on carbon tax will be a disadvantage to low-income earners, remember the government is for all of us. The government is for those who have high earn, and those who earn low. The government does not take sides here. It will have to design the carbon tax in a very progressive manner, which will not disadvantage the people who earn low income. They will have to be considerate on the people who earn low, because if the government already knows that they want to introduce this carbon tax, it means that they already sat down and they know the steps they are supposed to take so that they can implement this carbon tax. They cannot bring something that they are sure is going to bring their country to a fall. They are sure that they want their people to earn the benefits of introducing carbon tax. In conclusion, if the Kenyan government implements this, it will lead to sustainable goals, good health, clean water, affordable and clean energy. I rest my case.
Thank you very much, third speaker. Team Opposition, you have 3 minutes.
My name is Musini Kiule from the Great Machakos School, here to oppose the motion that states, the government of Kenya should introduce carbon tax to encourage environmentally sustainable practices. First, I would like to, the team proposition offered us with agriculture being, and a point on agriculture, and what I want to ask you, do you know that agriculture accounts for 25% of the GHG gases emissions? Whereas the UN, a study by the UN showed that the population of the world will rise to up to 10 billion by 2057. And this will be needed to have an increase in 50% of our food production. And I should ask you a question. How will we balance our food security and our environmentally sustainable practices if you're going to introduce carbon tax? Remember, carbon tax is on a polluter pay basis. And being on a polluter pay basis, it will mean that the agricultural sector will be adversely affected by the carbon tax, increasing the cost of production. And how will we be able to manage food security? Now, on to my first point. I believe that carbon tax is a recessive regime of taxing. Why do I say this? Because it will undermine the people of the lower social classes. Take, for example, taxing poverty. I use charcoal, not because that it is my choice, but circumstance forces me to use charcoal. Why should you tax poverty? This means that you have no sense for humanity. If at all, you will have to tax poverty. On to my second point, the government has not yet exploited all other avenues that they can use to minimize carbon emissions. For example, they can in our cities, Nairobi, Kisumu, and Mombasa, they are congested. We can introduce congestion fees to decongest these cities. And what will in turn out of these congestion fees? It will free the cities from congestion, and thus the commuters in the city will be able to depend on non-motorized transport systems. Don't you believe that using non-motorized transport systems will reduce the carbon emissions? I do believe that it will reduce. Also, we can
we see that the government from our neighbors, Tanzania, we can see that they have implemented a rapid bus transport system. I was just going through the East African when I noticed this. And I also noticed that Kenya should borrow a leaf from our neighbors so as to enhance our transport systems and decongest our cities, and thus reducing our carbon emissions. And with that, it is upon you to join me in opposing the motion that states carbon taxes should be introduced in Kenya to encourage environmentally sustainable development. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will be taking closing remarks from both teams. Team Proposition, you have 1 minute to give your closing remark.
I, Winifred Mumo, still strongly propose the motion. Every country wants a bright future for its citizens. If carbon tax is introduced, it will serve as a proper tool to encourage environmentally sustainable practices, thus enhance good health and well-being for its citizens. And that is why I strongly stand here to propose the motion that states the Kenyan government should introduce carbon tax to encourage environmentally sustainable practices. Yes. What legacy do you want to leave behind? Carbon tax is actually the better way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Team Opposition. You have 1 minute to give your closing remark.
Again, it is Ephraim Kiari from the Machakos School, and I would like to oppose what my fellow worthy opponent has just mentioned. You mentioned that introduction of a carbon tax will act as a proper tool. But is it the best? Is it? This introduction of carbon taxes will lead to tax evasion. According to KRA, in March 2022, 2 company directors were faced with 26 counts of tax evasion, worth of 92 million. If we introduce this carbon tax and they start practicing tax evasion by lying to us about how much carbon they are producing, do you think we are assisting ourselves or degrading ourselves? It is this short explanation that I urge you to oppose the introduction of carbon taxes, for there are better ways to better our environment. I will end with words spoken by the former Prime Minister of Australia, Julia Gillard. There will be no carbon tax under the government I lead. Food for thought. I rest my case.
That was a very good debate. I'd even like to start by saying that this is a topic that's very passionate to me, so it was very nice to see people bring different points. I will give specific comments, and then Judge Jomo is going to give just a general overview of what the debate was like. And this time I'm going to start with the opposers, because initially I started with the proposers. So Farrell is very passionate. I like that, and I like that the rebuttal was very straight to the point. That was very good. When it comes to Finland carbon tax and the Australian carbon tax, I think more would have been said about that, just to show how it did not work, because you're opposing the carbon tax. So more should have been done in terms of Finland and Australia. Otherwise, the argument was very good. Ephraim, something very special about him, about how he argued his points. That was very nice. I like that he was very passionate in, first of all, his rebuttal of how carbon tax can lead to less money, which would eventually lead to less employment in the industrial side, and that, I think that was very good. And also his facts were right. That was very important when it came to the EACC and the UN, and the facts were also recent. As I had mentioned initially, it's very important to bring out facts that are recent, because something might be true in 2023, but it wasn't in 2012, so that was very good. For Musinde, Musinde, right? Yes. Musindi, sorry. Also, your rebuttal was good. And I liked that you brought about charcoal, which is used by people who are not necessarily wealthy, yet it seems like what the other people were saying, according to you, was that this tax is going to be used for only big corporates. So it was important that you brought out the aspect of even people who are not necessarily rich are also emitting carbon into the environment. And I think that was good. For the proposers, Winfred, I'll start with the introduction that you gave. I think more would have been done in terms of the introduction. There's a lot of material, there's a lot that has been written in terms of environmental, sustainable practices. Otherwise, the rest of it was good. I also liked how you linked the results of implementing carbon tax, which would then make the weather and the climate better, which would then make predicting the weather very good for agriculture, especially in Africa, where agriculture is one of the main money-making activities that people do. As I had initially said, it's very important to bring out what happens when something is implemented, and I think this was very, very well done. For Pacifica, thank you for bringing in the aspect of other countries that have implemented the carbon tax and what has happened in their countries. I like that you linked the carbon tax and the results that have been gotten in more countries other than one that was listed by the opposer. Well done. For Lizzie, for coherence, there are bits where I didn't find coherence. There were points that did not match with the other ones, but I got what you meant, and I believe the other team, the audience got what you were saying. But all in all, I'm very happy that you brought out the aspect of reduced carbon in Sweden, and you gave us the numbers and you gave us the facts. You also brought out the aspect of, in case this was implemented in our nation, what this would mean for us. And I think that was very well listed.
The motion has two sides: carbon tax and environmentally sustainable practices. The second part was given a raw deal in a way by both teams. For the proposers, we expected you to clearly link how the carbon tax led to the environmentally sustainable practice. How did it work? So that bit needed to come out. Apart from Pacifica, who brought that out, the other two speakers largely focused on the carbon tax alone. Then Machakos School, we also expected, that you were opposing, to equally bring out more aspects of environmentally sustainable practices that can be utilized apart from just going for the carbon tax. Issues like sustainable forest management, sustainable agriculture, like crop rotation, urban designs, embracing nuclear energy. These are some of the things that could have made your score go higher. Generally, there was justice done. All the best. Thank you.
We have come to the most anticipated part of this debate, is what have the judges awarded both teams, and the judges have awarded Matungulu girls with 66%. A round of applause please for Matungulu girls. And the judges have awarded Machakos School with 68%. A round of applause please for Machakos School. And the winners of this debate are Machakos School with 68%. A round of applause please for Machakos School. Thank you very much. We have come to the end of this debate here at the Debate Circle. And until next time, it is goodbye from us. Remember to check our social media handles for more of this content on YouTube, on Instagram, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, and a bit on Threads, and a bit of TikTok too at the Debate Circle. From our end, it is goodbye.